Okay, so Daniel Nieh is a writer and translator. He grew up in Portland, Oregon, and has lived in China, Japan, Singapore, Mexico, Netherlands, and the United Kingdom. Studied Chinese literature at the University of Pennsylvania and the School of Oriental Language and African, and the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. He's translated for universities, nonprofits, and museums around the world. Was the interpreter for the 2018 Beijing Olympics, and works as a contract linguist for the U.S. Department of State. And his writing has appeared in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and Esquire. So.
I must make sure no one's in the waiting room.
This is live on ESPN, right?
Yeah, exactly. We're just cutting off football for this.
Cool. Well, thank you, Warren, for introducing me and for organizing this. And I mean, I think we should address that it's an intimate gathering. So I suggest everybody get up and sit in the first row or the first seat right in front of me. Yeah. To me, this is a cool opportunity. Yeah, or you don't have to sit over there. Let's sit right here. This is not my plan part yet, but I'll get into that. But I will say that, I've been promoting this book now since it came out in early July. And as I was just telling Warren, the first thing I did was at Powell's Books right when it came out. And there were like 30, 40 people there. And I was super bummed because the first time, and Arnie Susie quote there, the first time, there were like over 100 people there. And it was one of the biggest crowds that Powell's had all year. And so I got there, the week that my book came out and saw only 30, 40 people. And I was like, wow, seats, like, what happened? And I was a little disappointed. But then afterwards, I kind of thought about it. It's like, well, downtown Portland changed a lot in the last 3 years. It's a little bit, those of you who know Portland know that like stores closed. There's a lot of houseless people now, and a lot of the people who came the first time were like my former teachers who were older, my friends' parents, all that stuff in my hometown. They didn't necessarily want to park downtown. In fact, our mom, she stayed until the end, and she ran off, and she's like, I don't want to walk back to my car after dark. I was like, Mom, I get that, off you go. Eventually I came to terms that were not as many people at the reading, was like, that's fine. And then I had a cool library. Then after that, it was virtual. And then this past weekend, super high off this past weekend, because I went to my first book festival, which was in Harper Springs, Michigan. And it was the largest crowd I've ever spoken to for 3 days running, except for the Public Library Association conference. I'll get back. But I got to talk to all these people, and the only other time I spoke to a crowd that large was the Public Library Association, which was before my book came out this spring. And I was there, that was in Portland, and I showed up. So those people, all these librarians were there. Yeah, incredible crowd. And I talked about my book, and one of the people who was there is is senior librarian or vice president, assistant director of this library. And so she came back here and said, hey, Warren, can we add Daniel to our events at this conference, right? Something along those lines.
And we're doing an Asian American theme this year. So
and that allowed me to come here today. And it was cool because the book festival just said, well, we'll fly you, to Portland, from Portland to back to Portland. I said, no, please fly me to Boston. I've been invited. And it's a chance to see my family, who I really rarely see because COVID and we're across the country. And then I'm going on from here to New York to see my publisher for the first time in over a year. So all this is to say, it's a big up and down crowd for books. I don't think personally. I'm thrilled to be here. And I feel like this is a cool, I'll do some of the usual spiel, but it's an opportunity for us to all talk together as well. friends old and new. So we've got my sisters and their friends and partners, and Kent, an amazing friend I know through my partner's best friend's college's husband. There we are, and it was Jeremy.
Yeah, the friend of Lauren.
So, we'll do some of this, and then we'll do some just talking about why we read, what we read, and whatever, and chit chat. And I also do want to shout out Unlikely Story, which is a bookstore in Plainville, and the very kind person, Kim, who runs that bookstore, dropped off some books, which was just like a hustle. They're so fabulous over there. So for those of you who are local to Boston, that's a cool bookstore. That was very nice of her. And
we've been over there yet. I've been meaning to get over there at some point.
they definitely have cool tote bags. Yeah, I haven't been there either, but the photos I saw on their website were cool. And it was just really nice for her to drop off some books. But if we don't sell unsigned books, that's not a big deal to me. She can pick them up and sell them at the store tomorrow. And nonetheless, thank you so much for having me here and organizing that. So, right, so I have this copy of Payback, just have the jacket. I think every author does this. I learned this at the book festival. They figure out which of the books that they were sent for free of their books is ugliest. Because it's just like, some of them, they're not all equally pretty. Some of them have water damage on them. Some of them were cut in the boxing or just printed a little funny. And that becomes their author copy for these things. And I'm going to read a little bit from the book. But before that, I just want to set the stage a little bit. So, Beijing Payback. Beijing Payback is the first book in the series. Take No Names is the second. And they're not necessarily books that you have to read in order. It's not like a saga. It's not like The Hunger Games where there's like one bad guy the whole way through, and it could be a bad idea to start from the second one. This book, Take No Names, definitely stands alone, but to read it does spoil Beijing Payback. So I'm going to make great efforts to not do that for those completionists who want to read it all the way through, or for those who are currently reading Beijing Payback. But the key thing that one must know about our protagonist at the beginning of the book is that he's on the run from the law, and he's wanted for murder that he committed. And he's living in Chinatown of Seattle, and he's on a bummer. He's not in a good place in his life. He's struggling with cynicism, disillusionment. And I wrote this book like mostly in 2020 and 2021. And I think what's going on with Victor is a little bit what I felt was going on with me and like a lot of our world, right? Just struggling with the virus, the politics, the social strife, the environmental disasters, all these things that were bombarding us from the news, which was like our only window in the world that we could go outside. And I was thinking a lot about cynicism and when you get on a deep bummer about the world and your life, and how you get out of it. And so I think that's really the character story of this book, not to spoil anything, but I think that at the end of Beijing Payback, Victor's feeling disillusioned. He's been through a really rough adventure, and he's stuck in a place where he's wanted for a crime, so he's doesn't have the opportunities in life that he thought he was going to have. And he doesn't see the sort of the justice, the fairness, the principles of America that he grew up thinking about, like meritocracy, if you work hard, keep your head down, all these sort of things that, especially if you're an immigrant, like Victor's father was, you might believe to be the values of America. He's not really buying that right now. So at the start of the book, he's in Chinatown, and he's on the run from the law, and he's washing dishes. He's got a cash job washing dishes at Military. That's the first time I've ever read, so I'll just pick that up. So I fled from LA to Seattle, started living underground in Chinatown, got a cash job washing dishes in a noodle joint called Chow Fun Fun. Back in those days, before I met Mark Knox, I worked 6 12-hour shifts per week. As I hunkered over that cramped sink, scrubbing sesame oil out of clunky plastic bowls, I often wondered what had become of the mild-mannered imagine Saint-Gentry lying low in Canada, forging signatures, drilling stakes, scaling drain pipes, or back in Beijing, handing out pecans for some new kingpin. Or hell, maybe he stayed in LA. Maybe he was teaching kung fu to children in Claremont. After all, police weren't looking for him. They were looking for me. Their warrant was for the stolen gun, Jules said to me on the phone, not the murder. They said he'd serve a year at most. It was a drizzly night last May. I'd been in Seattle for 3 months and my case hadn't cooled. Plainclothes detectives were dropping by my sister's apartment and flying her for funds. I told her that we shouldn't speak, but she insisted on calling me anyway, always late at night, always using an encrypted VoIP app to circumvent the 10-trap order that the police had likely placed on her phone. They're lying to you, I hissed, pacing the alleyway behind Chow Fun Fun, the threshold. Do you really think they're knocking on your door because they need that larceny collar? If I turn myself in, they're going to pin me with manslaughter. That's 3 to 6 years, Jules. Yeah, well, I seem to hear her tip her head from side to side. That lawyer said you'd definitely be acquitted. 1, you have no priors. 2, the gun you stole was not the murder weapon. And 3, you didn't do it. They can't convict you on circumstantial evidence. I rolled my eyes. She's saying that because you're a potential client. What does she charge? $3.50 an hour, whether or not I rot in prison? I have the money, Victor. I already told you that. I choked back a snort of disgust, kicked a sodden cardboard box across the alley. Jules had Dad's money. Money soaked in blood. Blood spilled by some gentry. There was no way I would touch that money. I have to go, Jules. Just promise me you'll think it over, okay? Fine, I lied, and I hung up the phone. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and reminded myself that Jules didn't know what she was talking about. My old life was gone forever, and hoping otherwise, even for a minute, would be dangerous and stupid. Then I rejoined my coworkers who were sitting on milk crates by the restaurant's back door. Even though I didn't smoke, I cherished the cigarette sessions in the alleyway after closing, because they constituted the entirety of my social life. The other employees sipped 120 proof Baijiu from Dixie cups and waxed wistful about their hometowns. Hardly anyone preferred living in America. No, they planned to return to Fujian on way, reunite with their Asian parents or patient sweethearts, buy a concrete house with a solar water heater, a compact Geely with front-wheel drive. It might be possible in a decade or two, if they saved every penny they did spend on their counterfeit cigarettes, which they smoked down to the filter. The cashier's mom in full shot was getting a dog. The cook's daughter in Anxi was turning 6. I took some comfort in knowing that I wasn't the only exile, living in the past, the possible, the purgatory of unrealized dreams. Chinatown knew me by an alias, Dennis Lau. I was renting half a bunk in a tenement flop for undocumented mainlanders. 28 men shared the 14 bunks in our apartment, snoring around the clock in shifts, but I didn't like that. I felt comfortable among these recent arrivals to America's margins. My roommates were shadow people. You never spoke to them. You rarely even saw them, but they cooked your food, starched your shirts, and vacuumed your office. They pulled 80-hour weeks for half minimum wage, and they thanked you for the opportunity. It beat the shit out of assembling iPads and build one for $30 a day. As for me, I'd grown up with a white mom, a free-spirited sister, a golden retriever, and a PlayStation 3. Dad had sheltered me from the dirt that filled my world. Now I was soft and he was dead. And once I knew my cushy childhood was a sham, only raw deals felt real. I tried hard to blend into Chinatown. I spent long nights in a all-hours internet cafe, working on my vocabulary, learning to read handwritten characters. At first, my roommates and coworkers seemed to like having me around. They called me Pinchiar, the Minch Blood Kid. I helped our chef contest some parking tickets, and word got around that I could write English like a native speaker. People came to find me when they needed to edit a menu or answer a letter from the government. Unfortunately, business at the restaurants was crappy, and the letters I translated were mostly bad news. Code violations, eviction notices, deportation orders. Being a Chinese immigrant had always involved certain amounts of maltreatment, but it got a whole lot worse last year. Our fellow Americans were letting us know that they'd always see us as aliens, even if we'd been here for generations. It all began when the president labeled China an enemy of freedom for propping up the genocidal Burmese junta. The Chinese premier responded by accusing the president of imperialistic hypocrisies. Before long, relations between the two superpowers deteriorated, from treaties to tariffs to sanctions to boycotts. Journalists and diplomats were expelled, consulates were shuttered. The vicious Chinese were the villains of every news cycle, and the new Cold War was trickling down to Chinatown. Yes, Auntie, spray paint says, monkeys get stomped. This is in italics, so this represents things that Victor is saying in Chinese. I believe that you have sufficient credit history, Uncle, but that's not what the letter says. He called you what? Oh, it's a slang term for a person of Asian descent. I filled out forms, filed appeals, and pressed the to speak to representatives, but most people still got screwed. Eventually, they stopped asking for my help. The Cantonese and Fujianese stopped switching into Mandarin so I could participate in conversations. I was no more at home in Chinatown than Qing Ting Tian Shui, the dragonfly that skims the water's surface. I told myself I didn't care. I had to keep a low profile anyway. I retreated to my internet cafe, stayed up all night sipping energy drinks, delved ever deeper into my language studies, having decided that total fluency in Chinese would be the best way for me to disappear completely. In particular, I spent a long time on the language forum of huayuan.com, an online community for people of Chinese ancestry. I learned about Zhengkai calligraphy, about traditional and simplified characters, about oracle bones and the Book of Changes. And when I read every post in the language forum, I clicked on history and politics. The politics posts overflowed with heated arguments in the comments section, although everyone seemed to agree that American politicians were stoking public fear of China in order to shift attention away from their own repugnant corruption and quagmire wars of choice. The history posts were the real revelations: the Chinese Exclusion Act, the mass lynching of Chinese workers on Calle de los Negros. I spent a whole weekend researching the murder of Vincent Chin in Detroit in 1982. Two auto workers decided to blame him for the decline of their industry, so they beat him to death with a baseball bat in the parking lot of McDonald's. These men were sentenced by a white judge to 3 years of probation and a $3,000 fine. Now, I've grown up in San Gabriel Valley, the largest community of Chinese Americans in the country. How come none of this was in my textbooks? I wrote onward to more message boards, stared wide-eyed at more disgusting truths that contradicted the myths I'd been raised on. COINTELPRO and MK Ultra, Salvador Allende and Operation Cyclone, Monsanto, Tuskegee, redlining. There was no melting pot. It was not a small world after all. Everyone was pointing fingers, hoarding privileges, staking out fiefdoms. And where the hell was my niche? Mixed blood kid. I had gone from illegal to illegal. I had gone from legal to illegal. I was immigrating in reverse. No tribe, no home, no name. So that message, I feel like, sets the stage of where Victor's at, like physically, Chinatown, but psychologically as well. And I think, I imagine to some extent, we can all identify with feeling this way. One, during the pandemic, when it's just like all bad news, and also some of the sort of difficult racial conversations that we've been having in the last few years about history that has largely gone undiscussed. And then two, at that phase of life. And for Victor, that's when he's like 24 years old. And I don't know when that is for everyone else, but just that feeling of like, wait a minute, like, this is not exactly what I was told about, like how, if you, like work real hard in America, then you always get ahead and so on and so forth. And it's accepting for everyone. It's, the land of the free and equal opportunity and whatever it says on, Statue of Liberty about, come all ye unwashed, so and so. That disillusionment can spiral into cynicism. And sometimes in our culture, especially people who don't see a way forward for themselves, that turns into a kind of like inner self-loathing that reflects back on yourself. So that's something I want to get into a little bit later, which is the idea of the incel, the dude who's alone and hates everyone because he thinks that he doesn't matter. So I want to come back to that. That's kind of where Victor's going for it when he meets Mark Knox. So, he's got a sister on the one hand. I think these are the relationships that really shape the book between Victor and his sister, Jules, who is back in LA. She's not wanted for a crime. And she's kind of pushing him like, hey, Victor, like, what if you face the music? What if you, what if you went to jail and then you came back? What's the worst thing that could happen? Is it going to be worse than what you're at now? What really happened? Do you want to talk about it? Do you want to address these traumatic events that you think ruined your life? And obviously, Victor, at this point in the book, is saying, no, I don't. And then the other relationship that's pulling him the other way is between him and this guy, Mark Knox. So Mark Knox is a character that Victor is about to meet at his gym, of course. It's like a dude meeting another dude at a gym. And they get down in this really sort of friendship way where they don't really talk about those things Victor doesn't talk about. They talk about sports and they compete with each other and they beat each other up and they get into hijinks. And if that sounds familiar to you, then maybe you are also socialized masculine in our society. I think that is something I really wanted to play with, that kind of tension between these two relationships in Victor. And of course, by the end of the book, without giving away too many spoilers, they all get roped into something that becomes morphs into a heist story. So I think this book starts with a road story, which is Victor and Mark in this kind of odd couple relationship. And I'm thinking of stories like Midnight Run or City of Thieves, or even like lighter comedies like Get into the Greek with Lane Train and Automobiles, where you have these people stuck together and they get from one place to another and they realize that they love each other, even though they hate each other, blah, blah, blah. And that morphs into a heist story where you're assembling the team and you got to figure out how to get the jewel out of the castle, and you've got to figure out who's going to be the driver, and you probably have an ally who's actually your enemy, and an enemy who's actually your ally, all those things, and take those cool, fun formulas of some genres, subgenres, and mash them together. That's what I was going for. And I wanted to set that in a world that reflected the difficult world that we were all experiencing and are still experiencing, but that this is just what was on our mind in 2020. So, the world that I'm describing here where, consulates are being closed and journalists and diplomats are expelled, like I say, treaties to terrorists, terrorists to sanctions, sanctions to boycotts. We're in the terrorist space. So this is a slightly worse world. Victor's world is slightly worse. It's not a dystopia, right? It's just slightly worse than the world we're in. And it does reflect the situation we are in now, where 10 or 20 years ago, the relationship between the United States and China was going like, maybe we can make a lot of money together and you will gradually move towards each other and we can access your markets and you can manufacture all our stuff and then, and that is not the scenario anymore. And we know that it's not just since the Trump presidency, but especially since then, things have gotten really frosty and communication is shut down. And 2 consulates have been closed. The Chinese consulate in Houston was closed. And then after that, the American consulate in Chengdu was closed as a retaliatory action. Now there's only 5 or 6 consulates / embassies in either country. And those are key resources for expatriate or foreigner citizens, whatever, in either country. And what that represents is a shutdown of communication. And to me, that parallels the kind of masculine relationship I'm talking about with Victor and Mark, where they can't talk about what's really going on. That leads to misunderstanding and selfishness, and it's the opposite of working together and figuring out how to make things, copacetic. And it's dark, and that's noir. And I thought, well, this is fertile, so let's play with that. So I just want to read another passage about what happens when Victor meets Mark. So he meets Mark in his gym. They start going down. Mark employs him to work at his security firm, which turns out to be kind of a little con artist, one-man operation out of the storage unit where he also sleeps on the couch. And the hustle that Mark has come up with is breaking into this storage unit. The storage unit is a federal contractor. And this is a real thing. I didn't make this up. I thought it up and I was like, does this exist? And then I woke up the next day and I looked at the scribbled note on it that said, I gotta Google that because that could be cool. That sounds interesting. And I did, and it's true. This really does exist. So in the early 2000s in the Bush presidency, it used to be, okay, you got caught by immigration by ICE, and therefore it used to be INS actually, now it's ICE. You must go back to your country. And in the Bush presidency, the laws and practices were rearranged. What happened is they started charging people who were going to be deported for crimes, which means first you go to jail for whatever, a few weeks or a few months, and therefore all your belongings get taken away from you, and then you get out of jail, and then you get deported, which is just like kicking someone when they're down, and you may not get your belongings back. And so I actually found reporting, and there's like 2 total articles on the internet, but these places do exist. So the place that they're breaking into, they call it lost and found. But what it is someone has a contract to store these belongings in what's basically a bureaucratic black hole, where if you were deported, I've got your stuff, and you're probably never ever going to figure out how to get it back through all the rigmarole and bureaucracy of the State Department of Homeland Security. And this stuff is just sitting in plastic bags in a storage unit. So Mark knows how to get into one of these storage units, and him and Victor are sneaking in there and breaking in, finding stuff, and they're pawning it. And the reason they're able to do that is because if you pawn something that you stole from someone and they notice, well, they call the cops, and then the pawn shop will know something's stolen, and you won't be able to sell it, and you'll probably go to jail. But if you're in this kind of black hole, right, this dead zone, and you steal this thing, you can pawn it, you get your money, and no one's any the wiser. And it's what I liked about this, what seemed really cool and noirish about that, is it made sense, you know, for those of you who haven't read the book, this is like the first 20 pages, so I'm sorry I'm talking a lot about it, but also I'm not, you know, if we really wanted to get into stuff of like really engaging with bullets whizzing by your head and stuff, and the car chase, that would require way too much context. And I would love to read those passages, because that's kind of when people stop reading, but that would involve spoilers. But this is all early in the book. They're breaking into these storage units, and they're like these scavengers, but they're scavengers on a corrupt system. They're moralizing, justifying it themselves. They know they're thieves, but they're like, are we Robin Hood? You know, are we just benefiting from this? You know, like, look at these people, these shitty people who are stashing away this stuff from these poor people who got deported. You know, who's to say it's bad for me to steal it? You know, I need to break in it. I've got the shank. All right. We first visited the Lost and Found on a drizzly night in April. We searched bins 21 and 20. Our cumulative haul was a pearl necklace, an e-reader, 2 film cameras, $386 in small bills. We burgled federal property for little more than what we could have made bouncing the door at a Capitol nightclub. On the giddy drive back to the office, I tried to figure out why it felt so good. In the weeks that followed, I developed 2 theories. Theory 1, dance with danger. Mark and I were weaned on adrenaline. Cable sports, console gaming, online poker, laser tag. Here was a game with real stakes, sneaking around in the dark, evading shitbag Jerry and his shotgun collection. Jerry's the contractor. After a night of Lost and Found, air hockey felt like home. Theory 2, the lure of fortune. Each plastic bag with a face-down hand of cards, radiating possibility. There's a big score in here somewhere, I know it, Mark said on that first night, rubbing his palms together. A score that will change everything. We hit several times, no royal flushes, but plenty of straights. The Rolex in bin 12, the sock full of engagement rings in 11, the vintage dreadnought guitar in 8, then Mark fondled for a week before consenting to sell. I inferred theories 1 and 2 from Mark, that hop in his step each time he came here, that daredevil desire to linger until dawn. But theory 3 came later. As I lost myself in the excavation of other people's tragedies, an unfamiliar feeling washed over me. I had trouble naming it at first, too warm for pity, too far removed for compassion. Eventually, I made up a word for it. Intonymity, the combination of intimacy and anonymity. Like watching a sad movie. You see someone up close, their eyes, their teeth, their tears, but they never see you. The third bag of the night is a carry-on suitcase. The border patrol label says C-10. I dig through folded clothes, suit pants, dark stockings, sheath dress, and scarlet red. High heels, strappy sandals, and a pair of training shoes made by Beijing. China's biggest sportswear brand. Its logo laughably similar to the Nike swoosh. Quality stuff, not worth enough to bag, but promising. Near the bottom of the suitcase, I find a small notebook clamped shut with a plastic hair clip. The clip catches my attention. It feels a millimeter too bulky, a gram overweight. I examine it in front of my headlamp, spy within its recesses and micro USB port. What's this? A cleverly disguised flash drive? My pulse quickens as the anonymity surges through my veins. This suitcase belongs to someone with a secret. I open the small notebook. Sticking out of it like a bookmark, there's a boarding pass for one Song Fei. November of last year, Seattle to Washington, D.C., a flight she never boarded. The pages of the notebook are filled with handwritten Chinese characters, addresses, names, places, and dates. Zhoujinshan, Old Gold Mountain, that's San Francisco. Yangtze phonetic for Atlanta. Another page has an address in Spanish, a price, $65,000 US per kilo, whatever that is. The price was followed by a seemingly random list of elements: you, aluminum, guide, calcium, and others I don't recognize. On the last page, 6 vertical lines of 10 characters each, a poem in classical verse. Who are you, something? I wonder aloud. An undocumented chemist, a roving bard. I push my damn unkempt hair out of my eyes and unzip her toiletry kit. Upscale cosmetics, clippers, tweezers, emery board, and a felt box, my pulse quickens, containing 2 rings, both gold, both set with gemstones, 1 emerald, 1 sapphire. My mouth turns up in the corners as I tilt them around in the light of my headlamp. Heartily stoked. I'm packing some phase things back into her suitcase when I notice a rectangular shape of the exterior pocket. I zip it open and discover a block of wood about the size of a hardcover book. A puzzle box. A thrill flutters through my chest. Dad used to bring home a pair of puzzle boxes every time he came back from Beijing. 1 for me and 1 for Jules. Whoever opened theirs first got a $10 bill. Jules lost interest in her early teens, around the time that Mom died of stomach cancer. I'm sick of him making us compete with each other, she said. So after that, I got salt too. I hold the box in front of my face, rotating in the light of my headlamp, feeling for moving parts. Aha, this one is basic. One of the ends, pressed just so with my thumb, slides a few millimeters on an interlocking track. That allows one of the long sides to slide perpendicularly, unblocking, it must be, a hidden spring in the center of the box. I squeeze the wide sides toward each other, the other end pops off like a bottle cap. Squinting into the open end, I see a layer of red fabric. Run my finger along it. Velvet. I flip the box over, tap, 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 and a gusseted bag slides into my hand. Inside, a second puzzle box, this one about the size of a deck of cards. The polished dark wood is inlaid with a dithering pattern of ebony and nacre. I give it a shake next to my ear, hear little pins move within. This box is much more ornate than the first. What are you hiding, something? I ask the red dress in the suitcase. Launch codes? Candy news? I could put the puzzle box in my dry bag, work on it later in the comfort of the office, but I don't want to share it with Mark. I'll turn over whatever is inside. Sure, I would never hold out loot, but the experience, that's for me. That's theory 3. I don't know if Mark feels it. It's not the kind of thing that we talk about, and we always work separate things. That's what builds the intimity, being alone with someone else's story, the clues, the hints, the heartbreaks, and not a thing I can do about it. Who, me? I'm nobody. A scavenger, a collector of mementos, an archaeologist of flow. On the cold steel floors of the lost and found bins, I meet dozens of people who will never meet me back. We can lower our defenses because they're already gone. I don't have to lie to them about who I am. I don't have to treat everything like a big joke like I do with Mark. Another habit established without discussion. Mark Knox and I keep it light. We've spent almost every day together for 6 months, but he's never told me why he was discharged from the military, why broken glass makes him vomit, why he never visits his son. He hasn't told me, and I would ask, because I'd rather not answer any questions myself. Mark pays me in cash. I think he suspects that I'm a wanted man, but he has no idea why. He doesn't know about Beijing, about Sun Jianshui, the men I watched him kill. He doesn't even know my real name. He doesn't know the first thing about Victor Lee. So I think from those passages, that's where the story starts, and so we find something in the puzzle box, and they have to go find a place to sell it, and the plot continues from there, and that's the plot, right? But the story, the plot's interesting, the plot gets you, excited, hopefully, it involves you in the story. But the story is one that I think that's what, I like talking about in these kind of opportunities, is of these guys who aren't talking to each other, kind of like the countries that aren't talking to each other. But you see how deeply Victor wishes to connect with someone, that just being there with people's stuff, just looking at their coupons and their underwear and their shoes and their books and being like, wow, there's a person here, and I feel like I can really release and because I don't have to answer any questions. They're not here anymore. But I get to know someone's story. And that's what people want, even someone like Victor who thinks he's not worth anyone's attention. That's how he feels. And the way Mark feels is a little different. Mark also thinks that he's gotten a pretty broad deal in life. But he doesn't think it's because, he's not worth anything like Victor does. He just kind of thinks that he doesn't care, or he pretends he doesn't care. So those are the kind of two archetypes of masculinity that I think I wanted to poke at a little bit in the story. One is kind of the incel, right? Who's like, I don't matter. And then the other one is the bro. And the bro is like, well, I don't care, you know? And these two guys, you know, they're going off to solve a problem together. And they have all kinds of skills. You know, I mean, Victor, he's very tough, he's resourceful, he speaks different languages, you know, he's athletic, right? And he's a good listener. And then Mark, you know, he's a communications engineer from the military, so he's good at that stuff. He's street smart, he's savvy, you know, and he's scrappy, he's a survivor, right? But the skills they don't have are skills of communication and compassion and vulnerability. And ultimately, what happens, well, you gotta read the book, but, you know, so many thrillers, you know, the story, and not all of them, a lot of great thriller writers are out there, especially writing with women protagonists, where this is not the case, but so many of the traditional hard-boiled thrillers, including like the Raymond Chandler stories and the, you know, the classic, you know, John Connolly type stuff that I really was originally most interested in when I started writing this book, the noirs, the hard-boiled stuff. There's this guy with a 5 o'clock shadow, you know, and it's just like I walked into the room. It smelled like eggs and whiskey. Like, you know what I'm talking about, right? And it's like everything is just like, you know, like how do I just, you know, tough guy my way through stuff, you know? And by the end of the book, it's like I killed the bad guy, I left the girl wanting more, I smoked a cigarette, I threw it on the ground, and I walked into the shadows. You know, and that doesn't need to be the way we write thrillers anymore. I think one of the reasons I wanted to poke that is because after I finished my first book, I was surprised that some readers, you know, were like, well, you know, like, I didn't think the female characters were very well developed in your book. And I was like, oh, really? I thought they were great. And I still think they were great. But I started looking back at thrillers and women in thrillers and men in thrillers, and what are the stereotypes that were just punching over and over again? And I thought, what can I do in my book to poke that? And in some ways, maybe draw some parallels between the way our political leaders also really fail to be vulnerable, to open themselves up to things that they don't know, to look at the other and not feel defensive or attacked, and really say, well, what can we do together rather than doing separately and alone? So that's really the fundamental thinking that lies behind the book. I feel like I've done a lot of talking, and now that, you know, the 7 of us are versed in my thinking behind the book, you know, I just want to thank you all for being here and say, if you do want to ask some questions, I'd love to take them. You in the first round.
What, you know, you talked a little bit about, you know, where you might have like started like the process, you know, where you were in life, what was going on around you, what, you know, you found some things maybe in your world where you're like, you know what, you know, that push you to say, you know, the masculine characters is not vulnerable, like there needs to be more things like that in the world. Is that really where you like draw your inspiration from, or like, you know, where, you know, how do you get from that thought to, you know, a heist in wherever the book takes you?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question because I don't think I really know the answer. So I think that's when I really think about that, I think that what I realized as I was coming up with the story is that I had a plot but not a story. Because I had a really good idea for a plot right away, which was that Victor needs to go to Mexico. And the reason is I don't live in Mexico.
Yeah.
So I lived in Beijing on and off throughout the 2000s. And when Beijing Payback came out in 2019, I had been writing the book for 6-7 years, and then it had taken a year to get published. And so, it had been that long since I'd been to Beijing. Last time I was there was in 2013. And I was like, I'm not going back to China. But I love the idea of like a James Bond type story where, he always gets to go somewhere new, and you get a window into that story, and through language specifically. So like if you take James Bond and then you just combine that with Cormac McCarthy and that, like going back and forth from Texas to Mexico, and English and Spanish, a little more depth than just James Bond, who's literally the guy who, I just described, who just kills the bad guy and leaves the girl wanting more and watching the shadows. I was thinking something like that, and I thought, well, I just got this book money. I could save that for stretch it out for a really long time. Or I could go to Mexico and choose to set the next story there. So I thought, okay, well, we have to go to Mexico. Victor needs a reason to get there. And then I thought, okay, what's his reason to get there? And that's when I started thinking, well, he's got to find a gemstone. And I did specifically think, I want to talk about China and the US competing for influence in third-party countries. So, without getting too deep into the plot of the story, there's what arises is that there's this big Chinese investment, specifically in an airport project in Mexico City. And while that's not happening in real life, in the slightly worse world it is, but in real life, there's huge, massive, like many, many billions, like hundreds of billions of dollars being lent by China to developing world countries in what they call the Belt and Road Initiative. And that money is going to 160 different countries around the world. So most of the countries in the world are taking money from China to build infrastructure projects like that. And it's really a soft power initiative by China. So basically by lending this money, they hope to curry good favor in countries where maybe the US doesn't want to go, because the US said, well, we won't lend it to you if you're corrupt, or we won't lend it to you unless you do the things that we want. China says, well, what if you don't take money from them, you take money from us instead? So I think I would just differentiate between the sort of the world, and there's the world, and there's the plot, and there's the story over here. And in terms of the story, that came last. And I kept messing with the world, which, I knew I wanted that, right? I wanted Mexico, I wanted to go, and I wanted to write it off my taxes. And so I'll go to Mexico, and there'll be Chinese investment there, and Victor will end up there. And I probably wrote 50 pages of that story, of that plot, 5 or 6 times, and it's like, it doesn't sing yet to me, it doesn't feel alive yet, it doesn't quite work. And so as I worked through that, I realized, this is tough, I feel shitty. What is going to give this more emotional resonance? And I think resonance, and that's when I kind of came around, like, I need to think about what is interesting to me emotionally in the world right now, in my own life, the lives of people I see around me who are struggling with cynicism, and a big conversation we're having about masculinity in this country. And so that's kind of that's how I ended up with this book, is really injecting the ideas that we were, that I was just talking about extensively into this thing that was basically attached right off.
I love the way that in Beijing, Payback, I feel like I'm there, and so I'm excited for this one to feel like I'm in Mexico. I think that kind of came through a lot.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, and I think that writing in first person and present tense is just a great way. That's why I chose that. It's like, it feels like you're right there. And I don't know Mexico as well as I know China, but I really loved it. And I thought, I want to give people a chance to go there and go. Mexico City is now one of the most visited cities in the world, especially by Americans. But they mostly go to the same 2 places. And so when I was down there, Tess and I together went to some of the places that they don't go, that you just do not see a lot of tourists. And I thought it was pretty cool to have an opportunity to take the reader here with this book.
Very cool.
Thanks. All right, we have room for 30 more questions.
I'm curious about so when you get especially into the second half of the book, there's the political landscape and it was very complex and really felt very immersive. I'm curious what is your process for, is that something that you just kind of absorbed over time and kind of live in that thought world, or did you do specific research in any area for this book?
Yeah, I think the research that I did, I read a bunch of books, and once I decided, okay, I want government contractors involved, I read books about that, military contractors, that kind of thing. And I read books about Mexico's political history, and there's not a lot of books about the Belt and Road Initiative yet, because it's only the last few years, but I listened to some really great podcasts about it. And it's just a fascinating story because, there is no airport project, but in Mexico, there were two very similar projects with Chinese investment. So one was this thing called Dragon Mart, which was going to be this big wholesale market on the Yucatan Peninsula, where all these Chinese factories were going to sell their goods to Mexican retailers to sell to tourists on the Yucatan. So they teamed up with some Mexican local partners and said, we're going to build this huge retail or wholesale market on this wetland. And it's going to be so great for your economy. And it almost happened. And then enough people, including environmental activists in Mexico, were like, we definitely don't want that. It's on a wetland. And moreover, we don't want to sell Chinese factory-made stuff to tourists. We want to sell Mexican handicrafts to tourists that we make ourselves. And it got asked, but not before a journalist's tires were slashed and someone else was gassed in their apartment. So there is a precedent. The other one was a railway project between Mexico City and Querétaro, a light rail project. And a Chinese-led consortium with a Mexican local partner won the contract, a $3 billion contract or something, to build a light rail from Mexico City to Querétaro. And the day after they won the contract, it was canceled. This was in 2014. And the reason it was canceled is because some journalists found out and reported that the Mexican partner of the Chinese investment, again, it gets kind of intricate, right? Had built a mansion that the president's wife owned worth $7 million. And everyone was like, wait a minute, did she buy that? She's the soap opera star, so did she buy that mansion for sure? And he was like, yeah, she totally bought the mansion with her soap opera earnings. We're also canceling this project. And that's the last president of Mexico, the current guy, López Obrador, his predecessor, Enrique Peña Nieto, his presidency was derailed by this scandal. So it is a real thing that, this kind of stuff is happening. And I love really intricately plotted stuff. And in some ways, I feel like my books are kind of for people like that too. I go see a movie by Christopher Nolan or something with all these crazy plots and heisty things, all twists and turns. And I'm like, cool, I want to spend an hour afterwards Googling it. And I think some people also like that. Other people are like, I have a headache. So for me, that's fun. And I do feel like the real life scandals like this are as intricate as that. And so it's fun to me to get into that stuff. Yeah. One more, anyone?
When you were talking about how they broke into the lockers.
Yeah.
And lived their life in there, basically.
Yeah.
What I was thinking was in Germany during the war, where the troops took what the Jewish people had.
Yeah.
And so they lived in that world, in a sense. I mean, I think that there's a story there, in the sense of when did they get to the point where they said, okay, enough's enough?
Right.
I was thinking of that when you were talking about breaking into the lockers.
Uh-huh.
That whole concept of living in someone else's world.
Yeah.
Which they did,
Yeah.
whether it was paintings, whether it was music or whatever,
Yeah.
That's my thought.
It reminds me of there's this painter. His name is Wyatt. I think it's Andrew Wyatt.
Andrew White.
Yeah, and he always paints someone's stuff. It's like a coat on a hanger above some boots, and you don't see the person, but it's so emotional. I think a lot of people, at least when I see his paintings, I'm like, God, I have that person. You feel their emotions, you feel their age and their sadness. And so that's what I was thinking about Victor, all this cool stuff.
And I mean, I was thinking also just the struggle.
Uh-huh.
Every person has a struggle.
Yeah.
And it may be with markets or else or, and that's life. It's how do we navigate the struggles?
Yeah.
And what do we do? Or do we get lost in the struggle and never really live life?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that shows, Victor, looking through that stuff, it's there's this kernel of humanity in him that's just shouting out, I want to connect with someone, and he can't do it with a three-dimensional person. He's just not capable of this, believe in himself, and he's afraid, but he can connect with their minds. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, and I think, that's a good place to leave it.
Yeah.
Thanks. All right, thanks to everyone on ESPN.